Hello and welcome to your A-Level Drama and Theatre exam, Component 3, Section B. Today I'm going to be looking at that phase performer. So we're very much going to be going from the beginning of the play to the end, and I'm just going to highlight for you some of the key intentions you need to be thinking about as a performer in this play. So just remember, for this exam you write about one character and you write from first person perspective. So you would use the phrase, as a performer I would. Okay, now you could get a question on 3 different theatrical categories. The first would be voice, second could be physicality, and third could be stage space. So just bear that in mind as you reread the play, and the stage directions are going to be so helpful to you. You need to show the examiner that you know what you need to communicate about the character to the audience. And it's all about finding the changing dynamics between the different characters and also the shifts in emotion and mood and atmosphere. Let's start with scene 1. So scene 1, we're at the boarding school, it's late on a Sunday night, and we've got Alice and Mia right at the beginning of their initiation. We've got Alice tied up to a chair. She's clearly been drugged. We find out she's unconscious halfway through the scene. And right from the very beginning, we've got this sort of playful atmosphere. Izzy's putting on voices. She's taking charge of the initiation. She's 1 year older than Mia. And you've got Mia, who's being silly. She's immature. She's laughing about the fact that people can't roll their tongue. She doesn't realise the gravity of the situation at all at this moment. When they realise that Alice is now unconscious, Mia reveals that she's actually given Valium to Alice, and it's at this point that Izzy really starts to panic. And what becomes quite vulgar about this moment is the fact that Izzy isn't worried about Alice whatsoever. What she's worried about is her own prospects. So she fears about her mum telling her off. She has fears about UCAS and her UCAS points. So we really see this sort of dark side to Izzy in her real being very insensitive to Alice. And on the other hand, we see Mia, who isn't worried about this at all. She's making fun of Izzy for being so dramatic. She doesn't realise the gravity of the situation, and it's from this moment that we start to realise there's something not quite right about Mia. Why would she not be worried about her actions? And we start to realise that there's this sense of neglect here, parental neglect. She doesn't understand that giving someone drugs is very wrong, particularly a 13-year-old girl who's younger than her. And we see later on in the play that the reason she doesn't understand this is because she's been around drugs for a long period of time. She has to actually give drugs to her mum. Henry does the dosage normally. Mia then starts to sort of goad Izzy, tells her that she's being pathetic, that she's scared, and this prompts Izzy to try to save face and carry on the initiation. And it's later on that we realise that they do carry on the initiation, and in scene 3 we see this big bruise on the face, and that's what they're referring to. So after the moment we see in the play, they actually continue to be quite physical with Alice in the initiation. We then move on to scene 2. This is Monday morning, we're at Martha's flat and we're in Henry's bedroom, and the whole mood completely shifts. We've got 2 people lying asleep in bed. Martha wakes up first. She gets up and we see her have this really sort of sensitive maternal moment with her son as she's stroking him. She's trying to comfort him in the bed while he wakes up. We start to notice things around the room. There's things like his pictures that have been torn up. There's the cigarettes and things like that. So we notice something's going on, and it's when Henry wakes up and he's quite frustrated with Martha. He's quite cold with her. He asks her if she's hungover, and we get a sense that there was a scene the night before in that she would have been very drunk. Maybe an argument happened. She ripped up his pictures. In his frustration with his mother and him being quite cold, she becomes quite manipulative, and we start to see some of the games that she plays with her son, mainly to get sympathy from him and to win him back over. So things like she has a panic attack and she hyperventilates, and we see Henry very sort of dispassionately go and get his mum a brown bag so that she can breathe into it. So we get a sense that this happens a lot. So you really need to think about the dynamic here. When he leaves the room, she stops hyperventilating. When he comes back in, she hams it up loads. So it's a game for her, and he knows exactly what she's like. After he calls her Cruella, she becomes quite sad and he ends up feeling sorry for her. We start to get a sense that this is one of the games she plays. And there's a lovely phrase you could use about Henry being an emotional hostage to Martha. And this, I think, is one of the ways he is a hostage to her emotions, because there's this cycle where she behaves badly, he gets frustrated with her, she makes him feel guilty, and he forgives her. And it just goes round and round and round. And we get a sense that this has been going on for 5 years now. The mood then shifts. He's forgiven her, they get into the bed and they start drawing together, and it's quite a still moment. She talks about how she'd much rather have lived a life of luxury than a boring one. So we start to get to know her personality a little bit more and her materialistic obsessions. We then have the door buzz and Mia enters, and again the mood needs to completely shift. Henry gets on with his sister. He tells Martha, he becomes like a parent, and he tells her to be nice to Mia. And this is where Martha retreats and becomes like a child, as she's being quite passive aggressive about Mia entering. She doesn't want her there. She says things like, she looks at me nasty. So she becomes like this really immature teenager rebelling up against a sibling arrival. And we then have this very awkward entrance of Mia, where she's standing awkwardly at the door. She almost has like verbal diarrhea as she starts talking, because she knows she's not wanted. Martha says, that's a very big bag, and she says, yes, I know, I'm not staying. So it's tense, it's awkward, and you need to get that across for the audience. And Henry, bless him, is in the middle of the situation. He's always trying to mediate the relationship between the two of them, because he wants to look out for his sister, but he is a full-time carer for his mother. It's in this moment that Mia reveals that the dad, Hugh, is going to be coming back over, and the tension really starts to rise. We get a sense of how much Henry does not want this to happen. This is really the start of Henry's journey, I think. From this moment, the intensity increases, because Henry knows if his father comes over, he's going to try and save the day, and he upsets Henry a lot. He left them, he abandoned them, and he can't forgive them for that. Henry and Mia have a little moment to themselves, and we find out how close they really are and how much Mia, thinks of Henry. We see she doesn't have a close relationship with her mother at all, but in this moment she says to Henry, I don't want to tell you what happened at school because I'm worried you'll hate me. So we get a real sense of how much she cares about her brother, and I think that needs to come across. It needs to be quite affectionate there. And this happens right the way through to the end of the play. In the last moments of the play, it is just the two of them, and she says to him, everything is going to be okay. We then go to scene 3, which is later that day on a Monday at the private hospital room. So this is Alice's private hospital room, and Mia and Henry enter the scene. We then get to scene 3, which is later that day on a Monday. It's in the private hospital room that Alice is in, and Henry walks in and immediately is pretty shocked by the state that Alice is in. It's much worse than he anticipated. He says he's frightened by what Mia's actually done. So we need to see that come across from him, and we need to see how much Mia's trying to underplay what she's done when she sees Henry's reaction. She tries to defend herself by saying how in a boarding school there's very different rules. Izzy then enters, and again we want to push this sort of vulgar nature to Izzy. She comes in pretending to cry, and then she talks about the fact that she was just trying to push her hay fever to the max because she didn't genuinely feel anything for Alice. She has this grotesque bunch of flowers, this horrible homemade card that she's made, and it's all very fake. This is all very much her trying to please her mother, please the school, so she can go off and do whatever she wants to do and avoid as much punishment as possible. Izzy then finds Mia and Henry under the hospital bed, hiding from her, and there we start to see this relationship develop between Henry and Izzy, where she's very flirtatious with him. She talks about how she likes his t-shirt. She's not really that bothered about Mia anymore. It's all about Henry. And at the very end of the scene, Mia says, yeah, she fancies you, and Henry says, she scares me. So, you can't have in any way a timid Izzy. She is not like that. She is loud, she is brash, she is very selfish, self-absorbed, and you need to push those qualities about. We then go on to scene 4. We're back in Henry's bedroom in Martha's flat, and it's now Tuesday morning, and the scene begins with Martha very much camped out in Henry's bedroom. We're meant to get a sense that she's been there all night, probably hungover again, so you'll want the bottles, the ashtray, the cigarette everywhere. Martha is really disconcerted about where Henry's been, so with that huge long opening stage direction section, you really want to get a sense of how she's very concerned about where Henry is, but more the fact that he's abandoned her and why has he done that. You know, he's been looking after her for the last 5 years. She says later in the scene, you don't have any friends. She's not used to this, so she's panicked, more for herself. When Henry enters the scene, he goes off, he has a shower, he then enters and he wants his clothes and he can't find them anywhere. So we want to get a real sense of him trying to search for his clothes. When Martha thinks that Henry has been with a boy called Ian overnight, she becomes overly affectionate with him. She becomes, you know, she's cuddling him, she's kissing him. She says, I always knew you were gay. And it's almost like all her fears of a woman taking her son away from her have just left. This doesn't worry her so much anymore. And then in this moment, Henry finds his ripped up clothes under the bed and the whole mood needs to change again. He's absolutely furious. He calls her a bitch. He gets really angry. And in that anger and the heat of the moment, he tells her he was actually with a girl. And Martha here switches. She becomes very cold. She wants her dressing gown back. And in this coldness, she grabs him and she gives him a love bite at the end of the scene to mark her territory. Very important, because in scene 5, Henry says she's gone, which means, you know, mentally she's gone. So we really need to see that build up at the end of scene 4. We then go into scene 5, which is set in Hugh's flat, and it's now also Tuesday morning, but slightly later in the morning. Mia is frantically trying to clean this minimalist flat. She knows her father's coming home. The minimalist nature of the flat suggests his absolute absence there, and it also highlights the fact that these young children are allowed to just, you know, do whatever they want, have these parties without anybody noticing what's really going on there. So she's desperately trying to clear the stains. Izzy comes out and she just wants her to leave. Okay, but all Izzy's doing is gloating about her night where she slept with Henry. So she's got her duvet wrapped around her, she's recounting the night, she's being flirtatious. It's very kind of cringy for Mia to listen to. It's not very nice. And we find out she's making half of it up, particularly the text messages. So you want to sort of really push the drama of this moment. And then we have a massive turning point, which is where Henry enters and the mood is completely changed. He walks in, it describes him as being wild-eyed. He's on the edge now, okay? He's come to this realization that something is very wrong with Martha. She's gone mentally, and the dad's going to come home and things are going to change for him unless he can sort this situation out. So the intensity, the stakes, everything needs to be much higher. There's now a dangerous edge to his voice. He tells Izzy to fuck off. He's not even listening to Izzy whatsoever. And Mia tries to, you know, calm him down, say everything's going to be all right. And she says, well, I'm going to tell Dad everything. And this is where we need to get another turning point, because he actually becomes quite horrible to Mia. And he talks about the fact that she hasn't helped him for the last 5 years. He's done everything. And at the very end of the scene, he roughly pushes her away. So that's massive. You know, these two that have been, we've seen, quite close. He's trying to protect Mia as much as he can. But in this moment, he's just pushed her away now as well. We then go to scene 6, which is early evening of the same day on the Tuesday. We're back in Martha's flat in Henry's bedroom. Remember from scene 5, we found out that Henry said she's gone mentally. So this is the moment where she's talking to the talking clock on the phone. So you need to communicate the fact that mentally she has gone. You know, she's probably starting to have a drink again. She's got her cigarettes there. She's pretending to have this conversation. She's putting on different voices. We then have Henry enter. And when Henry enters, she plays another game with him. Remember what I said, she can be very manipulative of Henry. She says that her son has died, and her son Harry has died 5 hours ago. And in order to try and get Martha back on side, Henry realizes he has to play along with her game. And that's going to be the best way to communicate with with her and persuade her to go to rehab. So he joins in on the game. He's very calm with her. He's trying to, you know, please her and get her back on side. And then he finds out that she's potentially been eating cat food, and he goes into a panic. This real sense of, you know, what's going on with my mum. I think it's in this moment he comes to the realization that actually maybe he can't save her, and everything he's been doing for the last 5 years has meant absolutely nothing. He becomes really urgent by the end of the scene, and he actually begs his mum to go to rehab. And this is where she plays yet another game and says, only if you have a drink with me will I go to rehab. Okay, we then go into scene 7, which is later that evening on the Tuesday at the restaurant. This is the first time we meet Hugh, and we've got Mia and Hugh in the restaurant together, and it's awkward. You know, he's moved on, he's got his new family, he doesn't live in the same country, and there's this awkward tension between the two of them. She tries to push things, she asks for things like a cigarette, he doesn't accept it, but he does offer her wine. We see a little bit of bitterness about his new family, and then we see him make out how much of a hero he is about saving her from her expulsion from school by basically throwing money at them. And it's in this moment where he has a go at her that she really changes her opinion of him, and she decides not to tell him the truth about Martha and how bad the situation is. And that's important because she was originally going to tell him everything, like what we saw in scene 7, but because of the way he speaks to her, the way he behaves, she doesn't trust him either, so she doesn't want to tell him what's actually going on. And we see this huge detachment from Hugh, this emotional detachment, when he says right at the end of the scene, yeah, I think I'm going to have the steak. And he talks about having his steak, is not really that present in the moment with what's going on, and we see this sort of materialistic money side to him. We then go into scene 8, which is back in Martha's flat in Henry's bedroom. It's Wednesday, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and this is the huge climax of the play. There's so many shifts and changes and revelations that happen in this scene, so the intensity needs to be really high, right from the beginning, right through to the end. Henry has been up all night with Martha, drinking, playing her silly games. She is really drunk by this point in the play. She has dressed him up in all her clothes. She's got all this jewelry on him. His objective is to tidy the place up at the very least and try and persuade her to go off to rehab. So he's frantically tidying the room before Mia and Hugh arrive. Hugh then arrives, and there's this very sort of awkward reaction from Henry. He is incredibly childish. He takes the mick out of him. He jokes about his chinos, and we see that there's absolutely no respect for his father, and that is why he's behaving so sort of immaturely towards him. And it's not a side of him we've really seen. We then have this short little moment between Martha and Hugh where they're in the bedroom, just the two of them together, and we see that he is very practical, emotionally detached, and she is very overly emotional. She talks a lot about his new wife, and we see that rejection still lingers on for her. You know, she's still very sort of upset by the whole thing. We see the jealousy of his new girlfriend. Hugh then reveals how he's finding everything completely nightmarish, and Martha just laughs at him. Again, this is like a game for her at this moment. Everyone's collapsing around her. Martha continues to be very spiteful towards Mia, and it's only when she reveals that she asked Hugh for help and he wouldn't help her, and we see the sadness go across Mia's face, that Martha actually tries to have a bit of a relationship with her and use her in part of her game and try and, you know, become pally with her, even though the whole way through the play she hasn't been like that. And then we have our huge big finale, which is Henry standing on the bed, screaming at his family that they've all led to this moment. He pisses himself and he blames everyone. He says, "You all piss on me." And it's only now, in this moment, that Martha realises what she's done to her son, but it's too late. And she holds him. She talks about the special moment where she was pregnant with him and how wonderful that was for her. And he desperately clings to her in this moment. And she says you know, I'm going to go off to rehab, and he can't let her go. You know, the thought of losing her after these 5 years now, it's all way too much. He's so overwhelmed, overstimulated. He's just left sobbing on the stage, and she leaves with her twisted dignity. In the last moment, she looks at her son, realizes how much she's destroyed him. And then finally, we're just left with Henry and Mia on stage. Mia tells Henry everything's going to be okay. She tries to soothe him, and all we hear is Henry's jagged breaths. So we are left with a completely fragile, broken son on stage. And Mia has had to witness all of it as well. So we see the repercussions of these two parents and their neglect and their own obsessions with whatever, whether it's Hugh's materialism and his new family or Martha's addictions. We see the impact this has had on two children who are left broken.